We have mentioned that the bondage in Egypt was to expunge or to rehabilitate the deficiency within our spiritual genealogy that was caused by Avraham's question. The Moedah, he questioned God, or because he had the opportunity to convert the Sodom community, which he did not. And there's a third opinion, because when he went to battle against the four kings, the mightiest powers of the world, he had interrupted the Torah study of his students, which was unnecessary. After spending 110 years in Egypt, the vast majority of Jews were pagans, except, as we mentioned, the tribe of Levi, who were not part of the bondage. It comes time, it's after the 10th plague. The Jews are devoid of spirituality. We're not circumcised. Our beliefs are pagan beliefs. And we have no merit, personal merit. Although God had promised Avraham, our patriarch, that after so many years, the Jews will be redeemed to go out with great wealth, but they still have to have relevance. To be worthy, they need a personal worthiness, a spiritual capacity to indicate that they have relevance to becoming the nation of God. We say this in Haggadah, the Seder. We quote a verse from Yecheskel, the prophet. God saw us, that we were spiritually devoid of mitzvos. Literally, in the words of the prophet, we were orom ve'erio, we were naked, we were stripped of anything which had spiritual relevance. But yet, God saw us wallowing in the bloods, in the plural. And God says, when he saw us wallowing in the bloods, he said, "B'damai chayi, b'damai chayi." Through that blood you will live, through that blood you will live. And the Talmud tells us that this is referring to the moment, the last period of time we were in Egypt, right before the redemption. We had no personal merit to be worthy, to be redeemed, to become the nation of God. God gave us two mitzvos, two commandments, to see if we would meet the test. The mitzvah, the commandment of circumcision, because the Jews in Egypt were not circumcised, and the mitzvah, the commandment of the Paschal lamb, to take the goat or the sheep, which was the deity of the Egyptians, and slaughter it and follow the rituals and all what is prescribed, how one partakes of this particular sacrifice. If we meet that challenge, we will have that personal worthiness. If not, we are devoid of spirituality and we will not merit redemption. The Jews did circumcise themselves, because if you were not circumcised, you were not qualified to participate in the Paschal lamb. And this was not only in Egypt, into the future, when the laws of the Paschal lamb are discussed, who is qualified to bring the Paschal lamb, to have a partnership in the Paschal lamb? It's only if the person is circumcised. Not only that, if the master has Canaanite slaves who are uncircumcised, he's not qualified to participate in the Paschal lamb. If any of his children are not circumcised, he cannot participate in the Paschal lamb. So circumcision is a prerequisite to be qualified to participate in the Korban Pesach. So why did God give us these two mitzvos, these two commandments? If it was because we were devoid of spirituality, we have 248 positive commandments. He could have chosen commandments which were not so time intensive, so detailed oriented. He could have said, take a four-cornered garment, put fringes on the garment, and this is a positive commandment. And not only that, tzitzis, the mitzvah of tzitzis, of fringes, is cited in Chazal, and the words of the rabbis are the equivalent of the 613 mitzvos. So it has enormous spiritual value. Why did God give us that mitzvah? To merit redemption or charity. Give charity to the poor. Well, each Jew should give of himself to another party. It's a positive commandment. If it's because we're devoid, why wasn't that sufficient? Why did it have to be specifically milah, circumcision, and the slaughtering and the eating of the Paschal lamb? Normally, when we speak about from bondage to freedom, if a person emancipates his slave, he's emancipated to be free. But the question is, free to what? For what? What is the objective? What is the value of that freedom? We were slaves in Egypt. We were Pharaoh's slaves. We were his chattels. When God redeemed us, in the words of the Midrash of Chazal, until now you were the slaves of Pharaoh, but now you're Avdei Hashem. Now you're God's servants. And this is why a Jew is not permitted to sell himself into slavery. It's something which is unbecoming and disgraceful that the servant of God should become the slave of a mortal being. Because when the redemption took place, that transition elevated us. We went from a common domain into a royal domain. This is similar. We find that Avraham Avinu, a patriarch, he purchased the tomb of Machpelah for the burial of Sarah, Imenu, our matriarch, from a heathen by the name of Ephron. And after he purchased the field, the cave, the field, and the trees, the Torah says, Vayokom, it was elevated. So the Midrash said, what does it mean? It was elevated. So the Midrash answers, it was transferred from the domain of a commoner into the domain of a nobleman of royalty. The innateness of its value rose to a different dimension of reality, of being. When we were redeemed by God and taken to be his people, to be his servants, we only became his people at Sinai. That was nationhood. As a result of accepting him as our God, he took us as his people. We became the Goy Kadosh, the holy nation. We became the Mamleches Kohanim, the kingly priestly nation. But factually, at the time of the redemption in Egypt, the first level of transition took place. We went from Avdei Paro, from the slaves of Pharaoh, to become Avdei Hashem, to become the servants of God. That transition took place at that moment. Now, what qualification does one need to become God's servant? Here, we've been immersed, acculturated by the Egyptian culture. All that we retained during the years of bondage was our Jewish names, our Jewish attire, and our Jewish language, which was Hebrew. Outside of that, in terms of our purview of life, we were no different than the Egyptian. So what is the litmus test? What is the indicator that we have the capacity to rise and ascend to another dimension of life and function to become God's people? God saw us naked, devoid of spirituality. We needed a worthiness to be redeemed. Although God had promised Avraham during the covenant between the parts that after so many years of affliction and bondage, your children will be redeemed and they will go out with great wealth. But why are we leaving? Not just not to have masters, but to assume a new master. God to be our master. What qualification do you need to accept God as your master? You have to show a level of negation, dedication, that you're willing to forego and appreciate who God is, that God is the priority in one's life, and every other aspect of our existence, our intellect, our physicality, our material, is only to facilitate as a means to an end to bring about God's glory.